So today I'm trying to reduce the movement in this specific babbet bearing. So there's cardboard spacers in there. They're fairly thick. And when I initially got it, I didn't think that it moved except axially, like length to length. But after I took the bearings apart and looked at them and cleaned this one up, because this had dirt in, I noticed that this side did move more than the other side. The other side was rock solid. This one moved back and forth, and it shouldn't. So the fix for that is you change the height of the spacers. It's designed to do that. So I kept trying. I used it two thinner on one side, one thinner on the other, and that solidified it, and it did no longer shake. So then it's like, okay, if I'm going to test this, I might as well make the effort to get the dust collection at least slightly set up. So since they had this metal plate, I figured, all right, well, if I just stick a wooden block underneath that metal plate or attached to the metal plate, that will block most all of the hole from the center section where the head is into the infeed table. And since that's the direction of the chips, there you can see where the block went. It's now blocked off, and you can see I left the outfeed table so that way the air can come in and hopefully go into the dust collector. And then I figured, all right, I need a temporary, and by temporary I mean literally temporary, motor mount for this. So initially I tried just putting it on a piece of bowling alley floor, and you can see that moves, so that's not good. So I stopped it immediately. It's like, that was loud. What was going on? And it's like, okay, that must have been that it was moving. So, all right, let's try it on that screwed to a piece of plywood. Well, you'll notice this is that link belt. Look how that belt expands and goes. So I immediately, after I noticed that, it's like, yeah, that's not going to work. I did not have it set for the correct length. I should probably work if I set the length, but it was not set right. So I switched back to the regular belt and tried again, and that seemed to work a little bit better. And then I figured, all right, I'll do some actual video showing the noise level and also checking to see and trying to show the deflection, which is like a 64th or so end to end. Now that I showed that, it's time to try and actually set up my dust collector. Initially I was going to try and do both hoses. It's good that I didn't, because as it turns out, where the second hose on the slant goes is where the motor is, or needs to go, at least with this box. This was the box that came with it for how they used to just catch the chips from the center, under the head. They didn't have anything to catch the chips under the infeed or outfeed that just less went there. Some did, but less went there. But this actually is already friction fit up underneath the table, so I didn't have to make something. So I figured, rather than making something to start, let's just see if this works. So I got the Rockler Quick Connect, took the hinges off, put it in the corner, cut the hole, attached it, put the door back on, got it all ready to go, and hopefully it'll work. And worst case, I can always try and attach a second hose later, but for now we're going to try one hose, because maybe one hose will work. You never know. So then I jammed it up in, and like I said, it's a friction fit up underneath, but then it's like, okay, I got to move the motor over here, and that explains why that's where the motor was when we picked it up. And it's still not stable enough, like the motor still moves under the plywood, so I definitely need to get it on a permanent base eventually, because when you see it, when I turned it on, the plywood slid. But I figured, all right, I got the dust collection up. We'll see how it goes. The dust collector's on. We'll just run some 2x4 stove, or 2x6s. These are not doing full cuts, and as you notice, the theme is, oh look, the outfeed table keeps moving because I forgot to lock that in place. After this whole video, I went and used pliers to actually tighten the bolt so it stopped doing that, but every cut or so I had to, there it goes again. And I tried to turn it, it just, nope, it still slides, and you can see every cut, and just the basic vibration, it moves. Basic vibration, it moves. Gotta move it again. Then finally, we're gonna get one last cut, and I tried a couple different things, 2x4s, 2x6s. It cut enough to do chips. It didn't do a ton of chips, and it didn't do a great cut, because again, the blades are trashed, but it did some things. So now that it ran for about 8 minutes, I figured, all right, I'll get my temperature, because according to the really helpful guy, Mark, from the one forum, he said the outfeed should, or I should say, the pulley side runs hotter, but it shouldn't be too hot. Well, this is kind of too hot. So what that means is I need to adjust the shims to have a little bit more space, because it's getting a little bit too much friction there. Because 140 on one side, or 145 and 107 on the other, that's a big difference. Well, it runs. I didn't have the guard on. This got up to like 108 on this side. That side got to like 143. A bit too hot to touch with the back of my hands. I had changed the spacing with a little bit to try and get it to hold better so it didn't rattle. And it doesn't rattle, but it might be a little bit too tight, I think is what it is. So I may have to add another tiny spacer. But the one interesting thing, well, the one annoying thing is I did not have this bolt tightened for the outfeed tables. So this kept sliding open, which is not ideal when you want to keep using it. Looking down in the box, there's no chips. I mean, there's a tiny little bit of sawdust down in there, but not anything. Oh, let's see. Is that enough light? No, that's too much light. Yeah, you can see. I mean, I didn't take a whole lot off, but I took more than that off. And so I think the vacuum will work. Yeah, no chips went down on the outfeed side. Again, not that I did a whole lot of cutting. And I don't think much came on the infeed side. Just a little bit came out. So it's kind of cool. It at least runs. It runs a little hot. The person I talked to, thank you so much, Mark, from the forum, he had said, check to see if it's hot. And it's hot. So like I said, I gotta adjust the spacing because it may be clamping a little bit too tight. I don't think it's out of oil. Put a bunch down in. I had run it a little bit, put oil in, run it a little bit, turned it off, put more oil in, waited, put a little more oil in, and I guess I'll go look and see if it's out. Okay, let's see down in there. Yeah, I don't see any oil. Stay there. So it could also just be that the box is fairly dry and needs more oil. That's always possible. It keeps going down and in. So I'm assuming with these things that as long as it goes down and in, you add more. Which I can do that. Now that I have a little oil can, I can do that. And yeah, I'm not 100% sure that this is the right. It's definitely a temporary spacing for the motor. It spins easily. It does not have play. Or at least it spins as easily as it ever did. Yeah, so added more oil. We'll wait and see. We'll put the plug back in and see how it goes. But it runs, so that's kind of cool. And I guess since I did cuts, I might as well show how it did. Not great, but I wasn't expecting anything great because it's only 2 cutters and this isn't necessarily adjusted right. And yeah, I may have been taking too much off at a time. This isn't the best wood. It's, taking smooth scallops off, I guess is the way to phrase it. When it cuts, it doesn't do too horrible, but it does scallops, and most likely that's because of me not doing a steady pace through it. Did scallop cups on there. It did, initially I was trying it on these crazy boards, and let's see, this one I did a few times. So it didn't do horrid on here. I mean, it didn't catch very much because this is a really wonky board. But it didn't do horrid. It's smooth. This is actually somewhat smooth compared to everything else. Again, it's a little bit scallopy, but this board is not that great. And it did, a little bit on the edges. The most that it did was here. And it's smooth. It's, again, not great, but the board is horrible. So I wasn't expecting an awesome thing. Plus, I know for a fact that the knives are beat to heck. So, chipped up, beat up knives in a not completely, it's probably taking too thick of a cut at times. It turns on. The one good thing is I think the dust collection is going to work. And I don't have to make a new box because it turns out the box that they had actually fits that spot. And I think the board that I put on the infeed side actually works to help keep the chips and knock them down versus fill up the infeed. I mean, I'm sure there's still some because there's a little bit of a gap, but with the 4-inch hose pulling air, that little bit of gap also may have airflow coming in. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes.